terrible at impressions. I can't do anything that sounds like anybody else. I can't do accents. I can't sound British. I can't sound Australian. I can't sound German. I can't sound Spanish. I can't sound anything else. I sound like a kid from Oklahoma. I can remember when I was younger, I was a junior in high school and I got to go on a trip to Washington, D.C. and New York City with a bunch of other high school juniors. And that's when I realized that y'all was not a word. Y'all is not a word. But in the South, y'all is used a lot. And I decided I wasn't going to use that word anymore because I didn't like it. But I digress. I'm bad at impersonations. I'm bad at impressions. I'm bad at all those things. My youngest is pretty good at them. My oldest is terrible, just like I am. And the difference between my youngest and my oldest is that my youngest has the confidence to try and pull it off. I think sometimes what you need is just the confidence to try, the willingness to get it wrong, the willingness for it to be wrong or for you to do it poorly. And you're like, I'll never know if I don't try. My 16-year-old will try 10 out of 10. And he's actually pretty good at it. Confidence is 2/3 of it. Like, I believe it. I think sometimes confidence is 2/3 of dressing fashionably. Confidence is 2/3 of a lot of life. And he is confident in trying impressions. The other 1/3 is recognizing that one true thing about the person or the thing that they're impersonating. Here's what I mean. You can butcher the voice completely and it'll still land because the line itself is the person. Perfect example, Matthew McConaughey. All right, all right, all right. As soon as you say it, you know exactly who it is. I didn't even attempt to sound like him. But as soon as you say those 3 words, all right, all right, all right, you know that I'm talking about Matthew McConaughey. Forrest Gump, life's like a box of chocolates. I'm not even changing my voice at all. But as soon as I say life is like a box of chocolates, you know exactly who I'm talking about. It is iconic. It is so tied to that person and that character that you cannot remove it. I'll be back. The Terminator. Come on. We know I'm your father. Darth Vader. We know exactly who it is as soon as we utter the line because that line itself is that person. And it's that person because this magical thing happens in our brains called recognition. Recognition happens. None of those phrases needs the actor's voice. They need one line that's true enough to the character that it survives a bad impression. Recognition. Here's a really random one for you. The summer that Talladega Nights came out with Will Ferrell, I don't know why, but that summer I started making jokes about 8 pounds, 6 cents baby Jesus, completely separate from Talladega Nights. Movie wasn't out yet, but for some reason I started making jokes and I would use that joke anywhere and everywhere that I could. I was like a walking dad joke at that point in my life, I guess, but I would work it in everywhere and I would use it for any kind of joke, any kind of reference. You know, I've got a few that I make on a regular basis. Still to this day, if somebody says they say something really dumb and one of my standards that I use to this day is that's what they called me in high school. You know, if they say some stupid name, I'll be like, yeah, that's what they call me in high school. But Talladega Nights, that movie was coming out. That whole summer before it came out, I would make the joke about 8 pounds, 6 ounce baby Jesus. And we went and watched that movie. And for those of you that have seen it, they're sitting there at the table and they pray to the 8 pounds, 6 ounce baby Jesus. And as soon as that line comes out in that movie, everyone that I was with on the entire row that I was on all leans forward and they all look at me. And they immediately looked at me because I'd been making that joke for weeks, if not a couple of months. And the running joke after that was that Will Ferrell stole my line. Now, we know he didn't, but that was the running joke. That line had become aligned with me. And when it came out of Will Ferrell's mouth, the recognition from all my friends was that line was mine. Will Ferrell says the line, 8 pounds, 6 ounce baby Jesus. Every person in my row turns and looks at me. And it's like the movie had somehow stolen it from me. And one of the things that I think about in regards to these silly impressions and impersonations and quotes and lines and all the things is this reminder that language has always been how we reach each other. Now, if we take a second and think about that, that's the most duh statement I could make. Language is how we reach each other. But the thing that I want you to think about today is, what is it that we're reaching towards with the words that we use? What are we reaching towards? Are we reaching towards the best version of ourselves? Are we reaching towards the worst version of somebody else? Are we reaching towards manipulation? Are we reaching towards getting our way? What is that we're reaching towards in the words that we use, the language that we use? And the reason I'm thinking about this today, and that I've been thinking about it here recently, is I read an article about language, and it was the study of language in the news. And in the study, they identified the 1850s through the 1980s, the news was filled with mostly logical language, logic-driven language, determined, factual, logical language. And after the 1980s, there was a pivot towards emotional language. This is in the news. There was a pivot in the 80s towards emotional language. And by 2007, we'd seen an explosion of the use of emotional language in the news specifically. Here's what that means. In emotional language, we are communicating urgency, we're communicating outrage, we're communicating fear, we're communicating the threat of what might actually happen. We're manufacturing contempt for a target. We're manufacturing this imaginary deadline to get somebody to do something. We're manufacturing a lot of these things in order to get people to react. We are fishing for a response. And I've talked about that in previous episodes, that we're fishing for a response. But I want to say something that I've quietly been ruminating on for about a decade. Here's the simple thing that we know. I'm going to say this and you're going to be like, duh, of course. Emotional language on its own can be impulsive. I joke with my kids. I drive a 2000 Toyota Land Cruiser. It's this big beast of a vehicle that I really love. It makes me so very happy. And there are times that whenever we're driving in traffic and I can see like a field off on the side or a ditch or somewhere else, and the impulsive thought that I have is like, I want to just jerk the wheel and drive off through the field or drive off through whatever. And I will tell my kids that, my impulsive, I'm trying to control my impulses, not to do that impulsive thing. Emotional language on its own can be impulsive. It can be ill-advised. It can be manipulative. Emotional language needs to be handled with care. Hear that last line really clearly. Emotional language needs to be handled with care. It can elicit a response, but that response can be the same as my impulsive desire to drive off through the ditch. That's a response, but it's not a healthy one. It's not a reasonable one. It's not a helpful one. It needs to be handled with care, because with emotional language comes the possibility, and honestly, manipulation becomes the desired outcome of that emotional language. We're seeing it everywhere. We're seeing it everywhere because manipulation only needs the appearance of honesty. I'll say that again. Manipulation only needs the appearance of honesty, not the truth. And these days, it's getting harder and harder to separate the two. It's hard for us to identify the difference. But there's this idea that I've carried for years, and we would be doing. I would do Q&A sessions when I was traveling, playing music. We would talk about songwriting. We'd talk about like interactions with a crowd. And I landed on this thought probably 15 years ago that I'm more in love with now than I was then. And it's this idea of the marriage of truth and honesty. And honestly, I think that I'm at my healthiest. And I think in general, we are at our healthiest whenever truth and honesty can meet. Now, let me tell you what I mean by that. Truth is objective. It's measurable. Gravity. The sky is blue. Measurable, objective things. That's truth. Let's not get confused. Truth is objective. Honesty is the felt thing. Honesty is where emotional language comes from. And it's what emotional language communicates. It communicates honesty. That's the emotional layer. Now, based on what I've said so far, it's easy to assume that emotional layer, that honesty, is bad, because that's where manipulation can come from. That's where unhealthy things can come from. That's where those impulsive thoughts can come from. That's where a lot of those things can come from. And it's easy to assume that emotional language is bad. And when it lives all by itself, it can be pretty dangerous. But here's the thing. Truth, when it lives all by itself, can be pretty dangerous too. There are things that can be true and they still hurt. And there are things that can be honest but not helpful. As the guy that wrestles with the 11 p.m. and all of the dark thoughts. I've talked about this in other episodes. 11 p.m. is that moment in my day that the hardest questions come out and that my biggest struggles surface. And in those moments, there are things that I feel that can hurt me. But when I can marry them to honesty, when I can marry honesty with truth, the best version of me can show up. The best version of my choices can show up. Because when you marry those two things together, you take the thing that is objectively true and you take the thing that is the felt human need, and you can align them in a way that this magical thing happens that I've been just fascinated with and enamored with here lately. And it's this idea of recognition. Recognition needs both truth and honesty together. It needs both. Recognition is the thing that we see and we go, oh, I've felt that. I've seen that. I know that. I recognize that. It's not a nicer kind of emotional language. That's the place where truth and honesty actually meet. When we find that place, something beautiful happens. I was speaking a few weeks ago and somebody asked a question, and just out of the back of my head, I remember the movie Ratatouille, the kids movie? Remy, a rat who's a chef. It's all absolutely ludicrous and it's really pretty beautiful. Towards the end of the movie, Remy's got one shot to impress the city's most feared food critic. Ego walks in. I find it kind of funny that his name is Ego. Think about that one for a second. And when Ego walks into the restaurant, the chef goes out and says, "What would you like?" "Impress me." And he runs back to the kitchen and says, "What are we going to make for him?" And Remy pulls out the recipe card, hands it to one of the chefs, and it's ratatouille. And the chef looks at it and says, "We can't do that. That's a peasant dish." And Remy is insistent. We're doing that. Every instinct in that moment is to reach for something impressive. Natural human nature is to reach for that impressive thing, something complicated. And instead, he reaches for the simplest dish in the kitchen. The other chef scoffs. Everybody wonders why in the world he would do that. And he sits and he makes this very simple dish. And when it walks out of the kitchen, it gets set in front of Ego. Ego even kind of scoffs at it until he tastes it. And when he tastes it, something happens. He's transported back to being a child. He's transported back to sitting at his mother's table. He's transported back to the moment in his life before he became jaded and critical. And he just loved to eat. He loved that moment with his mother, eating that food that was simple and beautiful. Back before food was something to judge instead of something to love. My chef friends say that you can tell everything about a chef's skill by how they cook eggs, because there's nothing to hide behind. And as a songwriter, I've said for years that the best songs hold up in the exact same way. A voice and a guitar, no arrangement, no ornamentation. A good song is a good song is a good song. That's where mastery shows up. That's where truth is married to honesty. And it creates this magical moment of recognition. In simplicity, there's nowhere left to hide. Only mastery survives. Truth, no bluster. I was sitting in a coffee shop one day years ago with a good friend of mine named Mandy. Mandy ran a yoga studio here in our town, and she had started traveling more and doing yoga trips and doing a lot of cool things. And she was working on a new website. She was working on really growing her business. So I sat down with her and we had a conversation one day about what her goals were. And when I said those magical words that I talked about in the last episode, "Tell me more," she started talking about how she wanted to be the best. Wanted to be the best yoga studio. She wanted to be the most popular. She wanted to do something unlike what anybody else was doing. She wanted to be the greatest in the city. And when she said it, I looked at her and said, there's a problem here. And the problem is that what she wanted that recognition, but it wasn't really aligning yet. And it wasn't aligning because of this simple thing. And I'm going to say this. I've told this story to friends before, and I try to be really careful with this story. And I try to be careful with it because of the world that we live in these days. Because out of context, it can be misread. And I want to say that before I unpack this, but this is a good friend. This is somebody that I trust. It's somebody that I respect. It's somebody that I really enjoy, and that there's a lot of trust there. And I told her that there was a problem and what she was wanting. She said, "What's the problem?" So I looked at her and said, "Mandy, we've known each other for a long time, right? Yeah. Do you trust me? Yeah. So I'm going to ask you to do something that's probably going to be a little bit uncomfortable right here in the middle of this coffee shop." Of course, she kind of laughed because she was like, what are you about to say, Brian? And I said, "Here's what I want you to do. I want you to look me in the eye, and I want you to tell me that you're the most beautiful woman in the room." She kind of laughed. Okay. But she got a little bit uncomfortable, and I was like, "I'm not trying to hit on you. I'm not trying to get anything. I'm trying to make a point. I want you to trust me as we walk towards this point." She said, "Okay." She kind of hummed and hawed, and she said, "Oh, I'm the most beautiful woman in the room." I was like, "No, I need you to look at me. Look me in the eyes when you say it." Visibly uncomfortable. Then she quickly looked at me for a second. She said, "I'm the most beautiful woman in the room." And then she looked away real fast. I said, "How does that feel?" She looked at me and kind of laughed a little bit and said, "It feels weird." I said, "It does feel weird. It's actually the point." "Why do you think it feels weird?" "I'm not sure." I said, "Do you think it feel?" I said, "I think it feels weird because it's a thing that we shouldn't say about ourselves. It's a thing for somebody else to say about us." "Yeah? What do you mean?" And I looked at her and I said, "Mandy, you trust me?" "Yeah." I looked her in the eye and I said, "Mandy, you're the most beautiful woman in the room. How does that feel?" I remember she sighed and let out a long breath and she said, "That feels different." "What kind of different?" I feel like my heart's grown 3 sizes." "Yeah." It's because some things change when we say them about ourselves versus somebody saying them about us. When we say that we're the best, when we say that we're the most beautiful, when we say that we are better than others, it makes us smaller because we've started this conversation about I win and you lose. But when somebody else says it about us, we can take the compliment. We have an opportunity to accept that compliment. At that point, it's not a competition. At that point, it's gratefulness and graciousness. Does that make sense? And this is such a hard thing because these are very personal things. These are things that we can feel a lot of insecurity about. These are things that as a man, as a woman, as a human, we feel a lot of insecurity about these things. And I'm not saying that we can't say good things about ourselves because we can. I'm saying that when we elevate ourselves above everybody else, we create a problem because at that point we separate truth and honesty. The words we use can bring out the worst in us, but at the same time, the words we use can bring out the best in us because we can feel in our souls how true they are. They can spark recognition. They can be encouragement or they can be arrogance. The difference is where they come from. Trent Reznor from 9 Inch Nails wrote the song "Hurt" a long time ago. Johnny Cash covered it near the end of his life. Johnny had already lost his wife. His own body was failing. And you can look this up online. Reznor himself said that he was uncomfortable with Johnny Cash doing that song. And he even said that he felt uneasy, almost possessive of that song. But then he watched the music video. And he said about Johnny Cash, when a man in that place sings about finding a way back, you feel whether it's true or not. And it was. Trent Reznor, the guy who wrote the song, could see that Cash brought a truth to that song that could only have come from his own life. And he recognized it immediately, not as a loss, but as something more honest than what he'd originally written. That's recognition. It's not persuasion. It's not emotional language. It's not performance. It's a man's life making something true enough that even the person who wrote it could feel it. Reznor himself saw the alignment of truth and honesty. And I'm going to be honest for a second because I feel real vulnerable in telling those stories and in wrestling with these things because I know how hard they are for me. I know how much I'm tortured by 11 p.m. honest fears, which can turn into like insecurity and lies if I'm being real. But when I can line that honesty up alongside of truth, it changes things. When I remember the things that I can say about myself and the things that I can receive from others, it resets that. And for those of you that are trying to build a life and a business and a family and all the things that we're all struggling to build, I want to encourage you to ask 2 questions. Ask if it's honest and ask if it's true. Can we do that? Can we ask if it's honest? Can we ask if it's true? Because when those 2 things are aligned, that's something you can trust. And I feel insecure even saying that out loud because I know how hard it is for me to trust. And I'm reminded about why I started this in the first place, because this is the place where I say it messy before anyone might assume that it was tidy all along. I hope this helps, and I'll see you next week.